Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Duke, and I am joined again by Sandy Stotsky. Sandy, for somebody who's retired, you are pretty prolific in churning out these books. You've got a new one, and I'm glad to say I've had a look at it. It's fantastic. It's called The Roots of Low Achievement. It's published by Rowman and Littlefield, and you can get it now from Amazon and any place that sells books.
Right.
Well, welcome back to the show, Sandy. It's good to talk to you again.
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm pleased to talk about my fourth book in a row with Rowman and Littlefield. I began in 2012 with a book that focused on teachers and the curriculum, a coherent literature curriculum. It was for English teachers. That was 2012. Then in 2015, I dealt with licensing issues based on my work in Massachusetts at the State Department of Education. And then in 2018, I began to shift towards the research that existed on whatever educational instructional programs and interventions had been devised for low achievers. And this one in 2019, The Roots of Low Achievement, goes into the context for the federal legislation, which we will discuss, I know, and sort of culminates my thinking in this 4-book cycle that I've done.
Well, you know what I think is really interesting about your work in The Roots of Low Achievement is that it's really a familiar story in some ways, isn't it? You've got educrats, you've got billionaires, you've got federal agents now who have tried to solve the problem of low achievement without really tackling the core issues. And so many other walks of American life, when you get these sort of very wealthy or highly connected government officials involved, they tend to make things worse, not better. So talk a little bit about the primary route here. When people tried to fix low achievement, they did it exactly the wrong way. And talk about how government messed that up.
The government began to mess it up, and I'm talking about federal government, back in 1965, with the first authorization of ESEA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It began through the Title I programs, which were frequently reauthorized over the years. And it wasn't until President George W. Bush in 2001 that we had No Child Left Behind, which introduced a lot of accountability, which was what people began to think was wrong, because whatever had been happening since the first authorization of Title I in 1965 wasn't helping low-income or low-achieving kids. They were still low-achieving, and there was still an awful lot of low-income kids in the schools, and they may even have been growing to some extent. But the low achievement wasn't being addressed by all the educational programs. So No Child Left Behind came out in 2001, which was followed under President Obama's administration with the adoption by most states of Common Core's standards. And I've written enough and testified enough about that, so I don't have to go into Common Core probably, again, which I don't do in this latest book, because I'm really looking at the context for low achievement through the years, and particularly for the original federal legislation, which was the first large toe dip of the federal government in education, which constitutionally, as you know, is forbidden under the Constitution.
Yeah, and it should be. And I don't know why there aren't more constitutional lawyers attacking the issue that way. The ESSA Act, the Every Student Succeeds Act that was passed in 2015, as you know, gives even expanded powers to the federal government that they don't deserve. But we talked about briefly how the federal government, as oftentimes happens, when you start take these global attitudes towards education, right? The almost laughable title of No Child Left Behind, like that's even achievable. You point out in the book, in your book, your new book, the Roots of Low Achievement, you point out that this is really much more an individual problem. It's a family problem. It's a local school problem. Talk about that. Talk about, we've seen the big government try and fail. Talk about how to fix this at the local level.
The family issue is important to highlight because it's been almost ignored. And this was actually the context for the first authorization of ESEA in 1965, which, as you probably remember, was part of President L.B. Johnson's War on Poverty. But in 1965, before that bill was passed by Congress in, I think, April of 1965, about a month earlier, what is referred to as the Moynihan Report had come out and pointed out that family background variables were far more important than the teachers or the schools that low income or low achieving kids went to. And then the year after 1965, this was now in 1966, the other well-known report called the Coleman Report came out, which again, part of the context for looking at the issue, came out and found through its correlational techniques that family background weighed much more heavily, was far more influential than teachers or schools on school achievement. Nevertheless, federal government kept putting all of its eggs, its money, into the education basket. And then accountability came through, which meant a lot of grade level testing after the 2001 No Child Left Behind legislation. I'm saying that a little slowly because some of these are long titles and their acronyms, NCLB, that some people may not remember, but they were very well known at the time. So you do have the question of, well, what is the context for low achievement? And the two major reports we have from 1965 and 1966 pointed to the family, but the federal government basically ignored, for the most part, the family. The only thing it ever did, and this is only recently relevant, it did a little bit of funding of busing. And you'll know what I'm referring to in contemporary political talk about integration for busing. But I've looked, and I do review the research literature on busing. We've never found that compulsory busing, coerced or forced busing, whatever it's called, and Boston is a prime example of the problems that led to. It led to violence. It never improved the schools for low achieving kids. So we've had a problem with the busing, the compulsory busing. It's not that kids didn't go on buses to school from rural areas, they always have. But when you started compulsory busing by redesigning school enrollment lines or districts, it has never shown to have improved the education of low-income kids. And that's true to this very day. So why anyone is even referring to busing, I don't understand. The research is out there. You just can't find much of it recently because people have stopped looking to compulsory busing as a solution to the problem of low achievement. And my book is basically about the context for low achievement, which meant looking outside of the schools, what researchers have done in the funding they've received from the USED and other private sources to try to figure out how to help low achieving kids, and the fact that we've just gone in the wrong direction with educational programs and interventions. And if anything, the problem has gotten worse, as you mentioned, because the gaps are growing between higher achieving kids and lower achieving kids.
Yeah, and the busing question that you asked is a good one, but I think I have an answer for it. There's a very incorrigible strain of progressive educational theory which wants to blame all the achievement problems on race and class and gender. They've turned this into a political football for themselves, right? The more progressive they are, the more bought into identity politics, the more they refuse to look at this as an individual problem and not systemic of larger strains of racism and sexism. It's why, with all due respect, the Democrat Party today seems to want to drag busing back into the discussion, as if we simply started busing kids across city lines again, you're going to fix the problem. And you said it, Sandy. We've got all sorts of research going back 50 years that shows what you show here, that if you want to fix low achievement, you've got to roll up your sleeves, treat kids like individuals, look at their family circumstances, look at their local schools and teachers, and come up with a comprehensive common sense plan to address the problem. But that's the last thing we're considering. We're going exactly the opposite direction, it seems now.
That is what you said is exactly right. We're going in the wrong direction. We're not allowing social factors to play the role that they should play in strengthening the family. The federal government basically doesn't know, I gather, how to construct research grants for non-educational interventions. So it keeps focusing on educational interventions. And many of them go back to the original problem in 1965 after ESEA was first passed. All the schools knew how to do was remedial reading, and you suddenly had this growth of remedial reading classes everywhere, and teachers weren't trained well to handle it to begin with. We had a problem in how we taught reading to begin with. That I know from my graduate work, because I had studied under Gene Shaw at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and we knew that there was a problem getting schools of ed to teach prospective teachers how to deal with phonemic awareness and phonics and vocabulary, which were critical for helping any student learn how to become a better reader. And we're still back where we were over 50 years ago. It's amazing to think that one of our major obstacles may be the teacher training program itself, which is why I have focused so much on teacher training and also revising, as I did in Massachusetts, our licensure regulations and the licensure tests, which now people don't even want because they're afraid that the licensure tests are going to knock out what they call good teachers who can't pass tests. But they want the kids to pass them.
Shameful.
Doesn't make sense.
Sandy, you mentioned this correlation here. We see what's happening now where moms and dads are actually being frozen out of the public schools. 10 years ago, the public schools were begging parents to get involved. Please help us help your kids. Now, they've written off the families and they're incorporating all sorts of educational strategies that don't want parents anywhere near it. Right. As a takeaway in your book, as we sum up here today, give me in a couple of sentences what you think you would do if you were queen tomorrow to be able to fix this. 2 or 3 things that you would do to help to begin to address the problem.
First thing is that we need to strengthen teachers and the school curriculum. We've got to provide a strong school system for all children, and that goes for all kinds of kids who are in it. Whether they flourish in it or not, the school is obligated, and it needs to be more under the local control of parents and local taxpayers who pay, as of the most recent estimates I found, about 45% of the tax base for our local schools comes from local property taxes. There are people who want to sever that link as if the government control would do better for all kids when there's no evidence for it. So first thing would be to make sure that we strengthen teacher training and get stronger teachers into our K-12 schools. That's one thing. And that even came out of the Coleman report itself, that the teachers of what they called white students in those days were stronger than what they referred to as the teachers of black students. So that has never been addressed, strengthening teachers and strengthening the school system. And then you have to have a stronger school curriculum, which goes back, as you may recall, even if you weren't participating in it, 1958, the post-Sputnik, or the NDEA, National Defense Education Act, 1958, after Sputnik. And That was the last time, just think about that, when the federal government was literally involved in trying to strengthen the school curriculum for all kids. And that is what is necessary too. And then one of the things I add in my final chapter in my latest book is the need to construct students' civic identity. We talk a lot about identities today, but no one talks about a civic identity. And we do need to work on how to make sure that kids see all of their other students in their classes and in their schools as fellow members of their civic communities, particularly their local and state civic communities. So those are among the kinds of things that I highlight in my latest book. But student effort comes through, by the way, referring to something you just said. We know now that student effort is probably much more important than we ever thought it was before. Yes, families are important, family background is important, but I'm referring to the work of an educational psychologist at Temple University in Philadelphia, Lawrence Steinberg, who came out many years ago talking about the importance of student effort. And we have forgotten that kids need to put out themselves to get ahead. And we don't have the incentives there anymore. We blame the teachers, who are unfortunately getting the full brunt of teacher evaluations, as if they are responsible for what the kids do on tests, what they do for homework, what they do in the class. And hardly anyone is talking about how do we improve or strengthen student effort. I'll stop here because I'm sure you've got plenty of questions.
Well, The Roots of Low Achievement is the book, and what you said, I think, is really summed up beautifully. And it's amazing how your Common Core work has intersected with this in terms of getting at the root of the problem here. But I want to let everybody know that the title of the book is The Roots of Low Achievement. It's available from Rowman and Littlefield. This is your fourth book in a row with them. And this is, I think, in some ways your most important book because it really does get at what everybody wants but nobody knows how to get to. How do we fix the problem for low-achieving kids while preserving an educational system that allows high-achieving kids to move forward? Sandy, thanks for your time today. We appreciate the book.